Good afternoon. Welcome to class time. It is going to be the first Sunday of the month of August. We've been doing this now since mid March. Seems hard to believe. All over 4 months. I've enjoyed doing it. We have another great class today. We're continuing our discussion of the shadows, where Old Testament stories or Old Testament law uh, have been shown to be more than just rules and or great stories for elementary, but they're also great stories for us because they prophesy about the coming Messiah. And we don't read these stories that way. We do not typically read them. So we've been doing this now for about, gosh, you count. I think this is week 8. I don't remember. We've had several stories about Moses. Had a story last week about Joseph and others, Ruth. And so now we're talking about Joseph again. And so this week, Miss Terry is going to present our class, and she's going to present on the entire life of Joseph, which is actually a lot of material. She has a helper, just a fuzzy little guy, and she will be presenting our class. So let's pay attention to Miss Terry as she presents the life of Joseph.
Hi there, I'm Miss Terry. I'm so happy to be here today to share a little of God's Word with you. I needed some help today, so I brought along my storyteller friend, Big Bear. When Big Bear isn't reading his Bible, he can usually be found hanging around our house with his friend White Bear, waiting for his best friend, Alice, to come and play. It's always a good day when Alice comes to play. Don't let his terrible posture fool you. Big Bear is a great lover of God's Word, like me, and gets excited, like me, about discovering the truth about God's love and plans for us in all the Bible stories. Big Bear just looks sleepy. He is really paying attention and is quite interested in today's Bible lesson. Before we begin our Bible lesson, I have a question for you. Did you ever have one of those days where things just don't go the way you'd like them to? Maybe you've had a whole week like that, or a month, or years. Have you ever read the story of a little boy named Alexander who had a day where everything just seemed to go wrong? From the moment he woke up, things were just hard for him. He got gum stuck in his hair. He tripped on a skateboard when he got out of bed, and he dropped his sweater in the sink while he was washing his hands. He could tell from that moment on it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. He went on a trip in the car with his family and he didn't get the window seat. So we got squished by his brothers and sisters. And not only that, he got a little car sick. Oh, Big Bear, are you okay? It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. The day got worse. Alexander's teacher liked someone else's picture of a sailboat better than his picture of an invisible castle. It was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. There was no dessert for lunch. And then he had to go to the dentist who found a cavity that needed fixing. A terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Poor Alexander. He decided to move to Australia. The other day, when I got home from a special trip, I found one of my favorite plants had just died. And the garbage disposal in our house stopped working. And the sprinkler system in our front yard stopped working. And the muffler in our car, you know that big important pipe underneath, had a hole in it. I thought it was going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. but I didn't move to Australia because some days are just hard, but not all the days are hard. Today, Big Bear is going to help me tell you the true story of a Hebrew man named Joseph and how God was always taking care of him, even in the hardest times. The Bible tells us that Joseph had many horrible, terrible, no good, very bad days. He had some terrible, horrible, no good, very bad years. But through it all, God had a plan. A plan for Joseph, a plan for his family, and through his family, a plan for God's special people. God used the bad days to bring his people to good days and to take care of them many years later. The story of Joseph and how God always has a plan for him and his family is found in the Bible in the book of Genesis. There's so much to tell about Joseph's life, it takes up 13 chapters. We read his story in Genesis chapters 37 through 50. Let's start at the beginning. Joseph's father was Jacob. Jacob's father was Isaac, and Isaac's father was Abraham. That makes Joseph Abraham's great-grandson. Maybe you remember that God promised Abraham that his family would grow really, really big, like as many stars as there are in the sky, or grains of sand, and that many nations would come from Abraham and be blessed by God through him. It's also recorded in Genesis chapter 17 that God promised Abraham he would take care of his descendants. That's his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and their children. And God would give them the land called Canaan. The Bible tells us that when Joseph was 17, he had 11 brothers. Can you imagine having 11 brothers to play with, to work with, or to fight with? Joseph's job in the family was to help his brothers take care of the many sheep his father owned. Big Bear, this one might need a little water in a little while. They needed water. They needed good pasture, good grass. They needed to be protected, and that was his job. Because Joseph was one of the youngest sons, his father spent more time with him, and Joseph became very special to him. So, Jacob had a special robe made for Joseph. It was very beautiful and had every color in it you could imagine, just like the one I have on. Big Bear, let me help you put on a special robe like Joseph. One arm at a time. Oh dear, I think you've been eating too much honey. You might have to lay off the honey for a little while. There was only one of these robes in Jacob's family, and he gave it to Joseph. All of Joseph's older brothers saw this and got very jealous. The word jealous means that Joseph's brothers didn't like him because they thought his father loved him more and because he got a special coat. They got so jealous, they didn't even speak a kind word to him. One day, Joseph had a dream, and he went to go tell his brothers. He said, "Guess what? Last night I had a strange dream." This is grain. This was not his dream, but this is in his dream. You can crush it to make flour, and to use flour to make bread to eat. Grain grows on tall stems that wave in the wind. When the grain has finished growing, the farmers gather it in tall bunches so they can shake off the grain later to be crushed and used to make flour. So back to the dream. Joseph told his brothers, "Guess what? I had a dream. We were tying up the bunches of grain in the field, and suddenly my bunch stood up while all of yours gathered around and bowed down to mine." The brothers were not pleased. They looked at each other in disgust. But But Joseph continued. What he was thinking, telling his brother these dreams, I do not know. Then I had another dream, he says. I had a dream that the sun and the moon and 11 stars, I have 11 brothers, they bowed down to me. His brothers were not pleased. Who do you think you are? The brothers said. Do you think you're better than all of us? Do you think that we would ever bow down to you? This made the brothers dislike Joseph even more. A few days later, their father, Jacob, asked him to check on his brothers. They were in the fields, quite a distance away, so Joseph went to find them. When the brothers saw Joseph in the distance, they made a horrible plan. They planned to kill him. Can you imagine that? But when Reuben, Joseph's oldest brother, heard this, he said, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in a well out here in the field. He said this because he was secretly planning to come back and rescue Joseph when the other brothers had left. So when Joseph came back and came to them, they took off his beautiful robe and they threw Joseph in an empty well. Look how dark and lonely this well looks, and deep and far down. There was no way to get out. I'm sure Joseph was very hurt and scared and lonely. This was definitely a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. A little while later, a group of people came by, wanting to sell some things in a faraway land called Egypt. One of the brothers spoke up. Why don't we sell Joseph to these people? This way we never have to see him again and we don't have to kill him. The other brothers liked this idea, so they sold him to the people who were going to Egypt. Unfortunately, Reuben had been working and hadn't seen what had happened. When he returned to the well, he noticed Joseph was gone. The rest of the brothers took Joseph's beautiful robe, dipped it in animal blood, and took it back to their father. When the father, Jacob, saw this, he cried, "Some animal has killed my son!" He cried for many days, so much that nobody could comfort him. The group of travelers sold Joseph to an important man named Potiphar, an assistant to the Pharaoh of Egypt. You might remember that the Pharaoh is the most powerful ruler over Egypt. He wore special clothes like this. Doesn't he look strong and powerful? Yikes! To be sold to someone in Egypt, that was definitely a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Joseph was very far away from his family now in a different country. So Joseph started out as a slave in Pharaoh's house, but the Lord was with Joseph and he helped him do everything right. God had a plan. So Potiphar made him his helper and put Joseph in charge of everything that he owned. The problem came when Potiphar's wife lied about Joseph to her husband. So Potiphar had Joseph put in jail. That certainly was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Or so you would think, because God had a plan. The Lord was still with Joseph in jail, and the warden put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. He never worried because he knew that the Lord was with Joseph and helped him do everything right. God, as always, had a plan. After Joseph had been in jail for some time, a cupbearer and baker to Pharaoh had been sent there. One night, each of them had a dream. They told their dreams to Joseph, and he told the cupbearer he would soon be let out of jail. "Please tell Pharaoh about me and ask him to get me out of here," Joseph said. When the cupbearer was freed, he forgot what Joseph did. So Joseph stayed in jail for 2 more years. That was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad year or two, or so you would think. But God had a plan for Joseph. One day Pharaoh had a dream, and nobody could explain it to him. The cupbearer then remembered what Joseph had done for him, and Joseph was brought to Pharaoh. Can you understand dreams? The Pharaoh asked. I can't, but God helps me, Joseph explained. And Pharaoh told him his dream. Joseph said, God is warning you. There will be 7 years when nothing will grow, and there won't be any food for anyone. What can I do? Pharaoh asked. God has shown you what to do. There will be 7 years before the bad years. That will be very good. So good there'll be extra food. So you should save a little bit each year. That way you'll have enough to get through the bad years, Joseph said. Joseph trusted God in his plan. So Pharaoh believed all that Joseph told him and put him in charge of all of the land of Egypt. So now he was important and special in Pharaoh's household. Don't you feel important and special? In charge of all the land, just like Joseph. Gone with the jail clothes. So much better. People came from all countries to buy grain from Joseph because the whole world was in need of food. Some of those people were Joseph's brothers. When his brothers came, Joseph recognized them, but they did not know who he was. It'd been like 10 years since they last saw him. They certainly didn't expect him there. The brothers, listen to this part, all bowed down to him because he was an important person, just as he had dreamed in the beginning. After a few meetings with his brothers, he could not keep it in any longer, and Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father alive? But his brothers couldn't answer him because they were afraid. They knew what they had done. But Joseph said, Come here. I'm your brother, the one you sold. Do not worry. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me, because God has put me here to save people from starving. Joseph was able to make good decisions about the grain with God's help and save his family and the people of Egypt from starving. So his father and brothers and their families came to live in Egypt with Joseph, and they had all the food that they needed. This was all part of God's plan. Even though Joseph had to go through many terrible, horrible, no good, very bad things, God was with him and took care of him and his family, just as he promised Abraham long ago. I want you to remember that the story of Joseph teaches us that our God always has a plan for our good and keeps his promises.
Well, that was great, wasn't it? I love Miss Terri's coat and Big Bear, not Little Bear, Big Bear's coat. They're pretty spectacular. And so that is a fascinating and very interesting story in there. And it's a story that has stories. Last week, Mr. David and Mr. Steve talked about one small part of that story. Joseph in prison when he dealt with the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. So that all by itself is a shadow of what's going to be the coming of the Messiah, because the Messiah, Jesus himself, is represented both by the baker and the cupbearer, in that the baker, his bread, his body died, and that the blood was shed by the cupbearer, but he would rise up to sit at the throne of the Pharaoh. And that is what Jesus would do by his blood. So that is a story within a story, but this time we're going to look at the entire life. If you heard Miss Terri say it, I don't know if you thought about what she said, but let me help you. 13 chapters of the book of Genesis. The last ones, that is almost a fourth of the entire book of Genesis, a fourth dealing with Joseph. And that's Adam, Eve, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, Esau, the Tower of Babel, all that combined, and Joseph is a fourth of it. That makes Joseph very interesting. He certainly has a lot of attention. And so if you look at Joseph, actually Joseph is one of, I would think, two main characters in the Bible who is never denoted as having a fault. Have you ever noticed that? Abraham made mistakes. David made mistakes. Great men, godly men, absolutely, but made mistakes. Noah made mistakes. Certainly Jacob was riddled with them. The judges were riddled with them. But in the case of Joseph and in the case of Daniel, and both of them which served foreign kings, rose to power under foreign kings, none of them are described as having made an error. Now, we're not saying that they didn't. What we're saying is that the Old Testament does not record them. And that makes them interesting. Who do you think Joseph is going to represent is the shadow? And so the answer is Joseph himself is a shadow of Jesus. So let's talk about it. And so let's talk about this story from the beginning. And this time, what I'm going to do is repeat the story that Miss Terri told. And we didn't really coordinate that much, but she told almost exactly what I wanted word for word. So that is, Joseph was loved by his father and was sent to his brothers. Okay? So we know that God loved his son, and he sent him with a message to his brothers, the Hebrew people, the Jewish people. And so in that sense, they are the same. Joseph was despised and rejected by his own brothers. Jesus likewise was despised and rejected by his own. They did not recognize his power. They did not recognize his authority, his kingship, anything about him, and they despised him for what he said. He was not murdered by his brothers. Joseph was not murdered by his brothers, but he was betrayed by his brothers. And they sold him out to a foreign country to get rid of him. Same with Jesus. He was not murdered by the Hebrews or the Jewish people, but they wanted to murder him. Just like Joseph's brothers wanted to murder Joseph. Reuben talked them out of it, but they still sold him out. Now, what they did not, Miss Terri did not say, but it's very much part of the story, is that they sold Joseph for silver. Just like they betrayed Jesus for silver to a foreign power, the Romans. So far we're looking pretty consistent. When they threw Joseph into the pit, they stripped him of his coat. When Jesus was crucified on the cross, he was stripped of his garments. And both ended up being taken to Egypt. Joseph, toward the beginning, Jesus very much at the beginning of his life, he was still a baby or a toddler. Both of them were exemplary servants. Now, Joseph is an important guy. He's a big man. He's obviously blessed, he believes. Comes from a well-to-do Jewish family, or Hebrew family more correctly. But now he's a slave in Egypt, and he still was an exemplary servant. Jesus was even more so. The creator of the world, and at the Last Supper, he shows himself washing the feet of his disciples. He too showed what an exemplary servant was. No matter how great you think you are, this is what he chose to do. He was tempted. I was really glad that Miss Terri didn't act out this particular portion of the story with Potiphar's wife. Very delicately and tastefully handled on her part. But Potiphar's wife attempted to seduce Joseph, to tempt her with her ways. Joseph refused. He said it would be sinful. Now, this is a fascinating discussion for me because we know that adultery is wrong, but in the Bible, it's not recorded until the law of Moses. The law of Moses is several hundred years away, but Joseph still knew it was wrong. Without the law of Moses, he refused and he fled to avoid doing something wrong. Jesus also did not sin. He was tempted. He was tempted. We often tell the story when he was tempted in the desert or in the wilderness, but this is not the only time. He was tempted from the moment he was born to the moment he died because he was human. And because he was human, he was constantly subject to temptation. And in all those times, he did not sin. What's fascinating about the story of Joseph was that if a servant or slave had been accused of such things, I don't know how he would have survived the accusation. Potiphar did not have the slave Joseph executed. He threw him in jail. It makes me wonder if Potiphar didn't really somehow believe that his wife was lying. Who knows? I can't tell. But I do wonder it. And Joseph was thrown into prison. Now, this is what he was thrown in prison for. He was thrown in prison for sins or crimes he did not commit. Jesus, too, was thrown into the tomb, into the grave, for sins he did not commit. Therefore, those lives are matching up 1 to 1. While he was in the prison, he still became an exemplary servant. Now, this man has a right to be angry. If these events were to occur to us, being rejected by your family, sold off, ignored, despised, sold for slavery, and then accused of all kinds of wrongdoing, you would be angry. You would feel that your world is unjust. You'd be right, the world is unjust. But those are not the world that we live by. He was put in prison and he remained exemplary. Now, this is where the story of the cupbearer and the baker come into play. So in this, the two men come forward with dreams 3 days, always intriguing, 3 days before Pharaoh's birthday. The baker has a dream, the cupbearer has a dream. They're confused, they ask Joseph, and Joseph, stating only God can interpret, proceeds to do so. The cupbearer is the guy who handles the wine for the Pharaoh. Now, this sounds like a low-ranking job. It is not. Most everyone who serves in such capacity is nobility. They are noble, the sons of noble men. They only put people they really trust that close to the Pharaoh, especially if the Pharaoh is about to drink something that person hands them. So this is not just a servant. This is a high-ranking, probably son of some noble birth. He has a dream to squeeze out grapes into a cup, and he's given to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh drinks. And Joseph gave him a good interpretation. In 3 days, the Pharaoh is going to lift you up. In this case, lift you up to your former rank, and you're going to serve in his court again. So, the baker had a similar dream, and he was really excited to tell Joseph. And he talked about bread in baskets, and the birds came and ate the bread. And Joseph said, in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift you up. But in this case, up on a pole, beheaded. So, the birds are going to come and eat your flesh. Sorry. it's interesting that Joseph will then tell the cupbearer, when you get there to Pharaoh's house, remember me, because I am in jail unjustly. He didn't bother making that request to the baker, probably because he knew he would never get there. So, one of the two lived and one of the two died. Does that shadow anything to you in your mind? So, who was Jesus lifted up between? Two men, right? Both of them are talking to him. Both of them are saying some ugly things at the beginning. And then the one says, you know what? We're here because we deserve to be here. Jesus, the man in the middle, did not deserve to be here, but you and I deserve it. So I don't know what the cupbearer and the baker did, whether they deserved it or not. But the man on the cross says, we deserved it. And he asked Jesus for a request. Remember me. And Jesus said, you will be with me in paradise. And guess what happens? One of them lives eternally. One of them dies. So, we have again that event repeated with Jesus. From out of the grave, Pharaoh calls Joseph. From out of the prison, he is called, because the cupbearer would eventually remember, and he would go to interpret a dream. And so Jesus too would be called. He would be called out of the tomb, and he would rise to sit beside the God King of the universe, God himself. And just Joseph would be sitting by the God King of Egypt. And there he would sit on his right with power and authority. And while in that position, this is a very complicated story. It doesn't often get fully told, even in elementary. There's an interesting part of the story about how Joseph reveals himself. It involves putting silver cups or money into Benjamin's bag and no. But in the end, Joseph's 11 brothers have come to Egypt looking for food. They're desperate. They're going to die. They know they cannot live. They come to Egypt for help. They have to go to the Pharaoh. Pharaoh sends them to Joseph, and they do not recognize Joseph. Joseph recognizes them, because at this point, Joseph looks Egyptian. You know that when he came out of the prison, they shaved his head and all those sorts of things. So Joseph, most Jewish men have beards and hair is pretty thick and long. He's also dressed nicely, nice robes, probably with gold. I'm sure they're wearing a rough-hewn, sort of rough material robe with full beards and full hair. They don't recognize Joseph. But Joseph recognizes them. And after a back and forth, he reveals himself to his brothers at a dinner. So how many brothers does he have? Well, think about this. There are 11. Does Jesus ever reveal himself to his 11 brothers? And the answer, at a meal no less. And the answer is, well, sort of. At the Last Supper, Jesus begins to show his 12 who he is. He is a servant. One of them walks out. And when he's left, he's with his 11 brothers. And so there, at a meal, Jesus reveals himself to his 11. When Joseph got to power, you know the story, you heard Miss Terri tell it, and that he was able to predict a dream about a coming famine that would follow 7 years of plenty, and he warned them to set aside grain in the 7 good years so you could feed yourself in the 7 bad years. Egypt apparently was all who had food. And, and with that food that Joseph secured and saved, who did he save? He saved not only Egypt, but he rescued his brothers. Because when they came for food, Pharaoh really didn't like them. He didn't really care much for them. But Joseph told the Pharaoh, "These are my brothers." And when he recognized those men as Joseph's family, he permitted them to enter Egypt. This is what is going to happen on the last day. On Judgment Day comes, we will all go before the Pharaoh, before God himself on his throne. He will deem us unworthy to enter his land. Our only hope is, will Jesus stand up and say, "I claim him as my own"? And if he does, the King will welcome you into the heavenly lands. That is our story. And that is the story of Joseph. So Joseph rescued not only his brothers, the Jews, he rescued the Gentiles as well. And Jesus will rescue the Jews and the Gentiles, all who claim him, all that he claims as his brothers. This is a fascinating story. And I can assure you, and the scripture doesn't say it, but I am sure of it, that when Joseph was living and he was in that well, and when he was sold to the Midianites in the traveler in the caravan, and they took him to Egypt and sold him as a slave, and when he was accused of seduction, molestation more precisely, and thrown into an Egyptian prison. Now, this is not a modern prison. This is an Egyptian prison. It was probably not geared toward rehabilitation. It was an awful, awful thing. And the years we're not even sure of. It was a long time. We know that even after the cupbearer, it was 2. So there was some serious time gone by. And even when he revealed himself to his brothers and he forgave his brothers, which is a huge thing, it'd be difficult for you and I to do. He was always merciful. And his brothers never trusted him, did they? That when Jacob died years later, they thought that now he's going to enact his revenge on us. He did not. Joseph did not know that he was play acting the coming Messiah. He doesn't know. And he may not have known what good would have been done. He said this all happened by God's will, that he could rescue them. And because the bad things that happened to Joseph led to the rescuing of not only his family, but of the Egyptians as well. We don't know how many thousands and thousands of people were saved because of Joseph's actions. We don't know. You know, we don't know either today. And so, bad days happen, right? Bad weeks happen. Sometimes bad months and years happen. But we have to always remind ourselves that we are part of the plan. And even if something good does not turn out for us and we never see it, Joseph got to see the good. But we don't all see the good, do we? We don't all necessarily get to see it. We will be confident and faithful all the way. Bitterness, anger, rage, unjust, cruel world. You know what? It comes down to how we want to look at it. It does not make the world just because we don't want to recognize it. But we cannot be subject to the rage and anger caused by it. Some people are born with gifts and abilities. There are those who are born with major diseases and affects them their whole life. It's almost like they never had a chance. It's not for us to say. It's not for us to say. We're to be grateful for the moment, whether we're in Pharaoh's house or in Pharaoh's prison. We should always be mindful that we are part of the outcome if we only hold on and be strong. I want to thank you. I hope you don't have a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day today or a week. Hope you have a great week. But if not, I hope you remain faithful, full of joy, full of love. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday if you can make it. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday through the camera if you need to stay home. Either way, we look forward to being together. You have a great week. Thank you.